I can still clearly recall the precise moment when my world fell apart and my life's foundation, one based on hardship, sacrifice, and never ending labor, was shown to be nothing more than a well crafted deception. When my brother Adrian walked in like he owned the place, I was 23 and working my third shift at Benny's Diner, scraping plates and slinging coffee while high on fumes. He always exuded a sense of pride, but this time it was different. Unlike the knockoffs he used to show off in high school, the Rolex on his wrist was authentic. No, there was weight to it. Genuine gold, actual diamonds, a watch that exceeded the value of my whole savings. I am Lena, and for the majority of my childhood, I thought that my family was the stereotypical example of a poor working-class family. Up until I turned 15, we shared a room in a dilapidated two-bedroom apartment, with only a thin curtain separating us. At least our parents always informed us that money was always scarce. As a mechanic, Dad would spend his nights smeared with oil, mending my sneakers rather than purchasing new ones for me. While other kids showed off new clothes every school year, I learned how to sew holes in my hand-me-downs from my economical mother. Dad used to shake his head and complain, "Money doesn't grow on trees," when he took another expired coupon out of the junk drawer. I trusted him. I put in a lot of work. Scrubbing dishes by 18, flipping burgers by 16, and babysitting by 12. I managed to cobble together $5,000 by the time I graduated from high school, which seemed like a huge sum of money until the college tuition fees began to pile up like an avalanche. Mom remarked in a remorseful tone, "We can't help, sweetheart. You'll just have to take out loans like everyone else." So I did. I became deeply indebted, worked several part-time jobs to pay for my community college courses, slept very little, and lived very little. My existence turned into a never-ending cycle of fatigue, with mornings spent making coffee, afternoons spent stacking books at the neighborhood bookshop, and evenings spent waiting tables at Benny's. Disaster is just one missed paycheck away. In the meantime, Adrian had choices. He never attended college and never gave debt any thought. The strangely encouraging statement, "Not everyone's cut out for school," came from Dad. Although Adrian's schedule was more of a myth than a fact, it was said that he worked for a buddy of Dad's at certain construction companies. But somehow, he always had money, always driving a car that looked a bit too fine for someone at minimum income, always dressed in the newest fashions. On a random Sunday morning, the illusion began to fall apart. I had unexpectedly dropped by our parents' house, thinking I would find Mom cutting supermarket coupons at the kitchen table or Dad fiddling in the garage. Instead, half buried amid junk mail, I discovered an envelope, a sleek, expensive-looking item with an unfamiliar brand. There was a number staring back at me through the paper-thin pane. $847,000. I blinked. Perhaps I misread it. It might have been $847, something typical, something anticipated. However, no. Then the other clues came together. Dad's great deal on a brand new automobile, Mom's thrift store clothes that still had their expensive labels, and the sporadic work travels that had never made sense. Adrian then arrived. And his fucking Rolex. I addressed him after my shift at Benny's that evening. Like he had nowhere better to be, he had strode into the diner and settled himself at one of my tables. He responded languidly, the usual, without even raising his head from his phone. "Oh, and Mom and Dad are heading to the Maldives next week, so don't bother calling." I nearly dropped my tray. With a hoarse voice, I said, "The Maldives? The same folks who, when we were kids, couldn't afford to take us to the lake for a weekend? The same folks who taught us that every penny counts and times were tough?" Adrian grinned as he looked up at last, grinning. He laughed and shook his head as if I had just given the world's cutest joke. "Oh, Lena," he said. "You're not still buying all that, are you?" My gut churned. Buying what? He didn't respond, though. Rather, he stood yawning and stretching as if this were all inconsequential. He said, "You'll figure it out," and walked out the door. I was sitting in my shoebox apartment that night, staring at my laptop with trembling hands while surrounded by past-due bills and half-eaten ramen bowls. I then got to work digging. Bank documents, records of properties, anything I could locate, and what I discovered unraveled everything I believed to be true. Our folks weren't merely at ease. they had millions of dollars. Furthermore, the deception went far beyond financial gain. This was more than a simple betrayal. All my life, I had been caught up in this meticulously planned fabrication, and I had finished their game. I woke up the following morning with a headache so severe, it felt like my skull was exploding. Adrian grinned. Mom's falsehoods. Dad's advice about thrift stores. It was the $847,000 stat broke everything. I was barely able to make it to the coffee shop for my morning shift, but as soon as I got off the clock, I immediately started digging again. It's okay if Adrian believed that I would figure it out in due time. I would do just that. I began with public property records, which I had mastered in a short, wretched stint as a real estate assistant. What I discovered caught me off guard. The working class saints, Thomas and Marlene Carter, who had advocated for sacrifice and humility, had 3 houses, not just one, a Miami condo on the beach, an Aspen ski lodge, as well as a property in southern France. Like characters in a lousy crime novel, each property was registered under a shell corporation. Their total value? More than $12 million. I was physically sick. Every school trip I skipped because we can't afford luxuries, Lena. Every summer I spent perspiring in our small apartment. And every night I sobbed myself to sleep, wondering why life had to be so darn difficult. All of it was a masterfully crafted fiction. And it grew worse the deeper I dug. Everything fell apart when I looked up Mom's maiden name, Lancaster. The building firm where Adrian worked, a family-run company. Adrian's employer, Dad's friend, only a manager. I had watched my brother walk through life for years, wondering if he had simply been lucky, if life was unfair, or if some people simply had it easy. No, he knew about it. They had deliberately caused me to suffer. Adrian was the weak link, so I went at him first. He had been all along. I texted him that evening, "Come on over, right now." An hour later, he arrived, leaning against my doorway with that same awful smirk, looking about my small, messy flat as if it were a joke. "Nice place," he thought as he entered. "Very. You." I didn't answer. Rather, I took the pile of real estate documents off my coffee table and forcefully placed them in front of him. Care to explain this? Something cracked in his face for the first time. He clenched his jaw. He stiffened his shoulders. Then, with a sigh, he combed over his flawlessly styled hair. "Took you long enough?" I yelled. "What the hell does that mean?" He suddenly looked so exhausted as he slid into my couch and rested his elbows on his knees. "It's complicated," he began. "Try me." He shook his head and let out a harsh exhale. "Fine. It's exactly what it looks like. Dad's been running this whole, whatever you want to call it, experiment for years. He calls it building character. He did it to me until I was 21. You're just a late bloomer." The blood in my face started to run out. "A test?" I said, my voice breaking. "Adrian, I have spent my entire life scraping by, killing myself just to survive. And you're telling me it was all a test?" He gave a shrug. I shrugged. "Yeah, it sucks," he acknowledged. "But hey, once you prove yourself, they let you in. That's what happened with me. You just haven't passed yet." Something broke inside of me. I insisted. "Past what exactly? Starving? Working myself to the bone while you vacation in the Maldives? Having panic attacks over unpaid bills while Mom and Dad buy yachts?" Adrian grimaced, but he acknowledged it. Rather, he leaned forward and spoke softly. "Look, Lena, it's not personal. It's just their way. And honestly, they're actually really proud of you. They talk about it all the time. How hard you work, how independent you are. They think it's made you stronger." I gazed at him. "Get out. Lena, get out." And he did. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the wall after the door snapped shut. I reflected on every lost chance, every restless night, and every tear I had wept in vain. They believed they were imparting resilience to me. No, they were making something very different. Furthermore, they were unaware of what was awaiting them. I had more research to complete. With trembling palms, I opened my laptop once more and saw a secret family Instagram account. Locked. Concealed. However, it wasn't from Adrian's previous email, for which I still had the password. And I was almost broken by what I witnessed. Mom was there, grinning and holding a glass of champagne while standing on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Dad smiling in front of a Lamborghini at the Monaco Grand Prix. Adrian with the caption resting against an unidentified sports car. Another unforgettable family vacation. Celebrating success the Carter way. My gut twisted as I browsed. Then I came to the one that broke my heart. A picture from last year's Christmas. Aspen. Warm, bright lights, a fireplace, a huge tree. Adrian in front of a just-purchased vehicle. The caption? The perfect family Christmas. Almost complete. I hadn't spent Christmas at home, as I was unable to pay for time off from work, because while my whole family rejoiced in a mansion across the nation, I had been working triple shifts and getting by on ramen and energy drinks. What about my gift? Nothing, not even an SMS message. I shut down my laptop. I then called in ill to all 3 of my jobs for the first time in years. Is it their intention to test me? All right, I would demonstrate to them the results of their small experiment. I had had enough of being silently suffering. I was playing for the victory now. I didn't get any sleep that evening. My mind was recreating every moment of my life through a different lens while I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Adrian partied every night while I remained up studying. While Mom and Dad sat on millions, I worked every shift. Every decision they took away from me, every lie they told. They even dared to refer to it as a test. Something in me had changed by dawn. I wasn't merely upset. I was finished. I brought my laptop to the public library the following morning so that I couldn't be followed. My only objective was to collect evidence. Adrian claimed that after I proved myself, they would let me in. I refused to enter. They believed they had kept everything from me, but I wanted it all. Step 1, pay attention to the money property records were where I began, but I had already located those. Bank accounts were what I needed now. I knew they wouldn't keep their wealth in a simple checking account, so I wasn't a moron. My parents and others were skilled at concealing wealth. I looked up investment businesses, offshore accounts, and anything related to our last name. That's when I discovered it. Holdings, Lancaster, LLC. A phony business that was registered in Mom's first name. In addition to the 3 real estate properties I had previously located, it also possessed luxury assets, stock portfolios, and offshore accounts. I became more and more repulsed as I read. Not only were my parents wealthy, they were extremely wealthy. What is their net worth? $50 million. I had been barely surviving all these time. However, the numbers were insufficient. I required indisputable evidence. Step 2, enter their universe. The biggest error made by my parents, undervaluing me. I knew how to live. I was able to adjust. And now, I was a skilled fighter. I went to the construction company where Adrian worked first. I dressed up in my best used blazer, entered their offices, and posed as an insurance auditor doing a review. People from wealthy backgrounds tend to be careless. Titles, not looks, are what they trust, and it was successful. I was greeted warmly by the manager, Dad's fictitious boss, who even handed me financial papers without question. That's when I realized the truth. This was more than just a profitable venture. A cash funnel was what it was. Revenue in the millions, but hardly any costs. Under the guise of legalese, they had been using the business to launder money by sending salaries to Adrian and expenses to offshore accounts. Step 3. Locate the observer's public documents were one thing, but I needed someone who had personally witnessed the reality. At that point, I came across Maria. I was too busy working my ass off to ever be home, so I hardly remembered the woman who had been our housekeeper for years. I messaged her after finding her on social media, and we met in a tiny downtown cafe. At first, she hesitated, holding on to her coffee as if it were her lifeline. But her face softened as I told her who I was, who I truly was. Then she delivered the words that almost made me cry. With a tone of sincere incredulity, she questioned, "You are their daughter?" "Yes." She shook her head after blinking. "I never knew they had a daughter." The world swayed. "What? They talk about Adrian all the time. They celebrate his accomplishments, throw him parties. But you? I have never seen a single picture of you in that house." I wanted to throw up, Maria, I replied, hardly able to control my voice. Tell me everything. She also did. She'd had witnessed everything, even the lavish vacations, the hidden accounts, and the secret bank statements. She had pictures of their yacht cruises, success parties, and opulent gatherings. Then she said something that made me lose my mind. Your mother keeps a journal. A journal? I said in a whisper. Maria gave a nod. She writes about everything, their plans, their money, even you. My coffee cup shook in my hands. Where does she keep it? Maria paused. Then, at last, in the guest room dresser. I was aware of my obligations. Step 4. Enter the falsehood my parents departed for their Maldives holiday 2 days later. Maria attested that she was the only person in the residence, so I entered. Entering that house was like entering a different reality. The penthouse room was a temple to luxury, the one my parents had always said they could never buy. Marble floors, chandeliers made of crystal, art fit for a museum. Dazed, I wandered the halls, absorbing a house that was more alien to me than my own flat. Then I discovered it. The visitor's chamber, the dresser, and within, the journal. My mother's leather-bound confession, painstakingly chronicled. I flipped to the first page while sitting on the bed with trembling hands. Step 5. Examine the facts. 16 years have passed since the initial entry. Thomas's experiment with the children is proceeding as planned. Adrian is breaking faster than expected, already questioning our finances. But Lena, she's different. She's too trusting, too determined. We'll see how long she lasts. I was ill. I read on. Emma got accepted to Princeton today. Full scholarship, too. Thomas says we should discourage her. An Ivy League education might expose her to people who know about our businesses. Better to keep her local. Struggling. Bile rising in my throat, I forced my eyes tight. Every chance they took away from me and every hope they dashed was intentional. Then I noticed the most awful entry of all. Last month's date. The experiment has yielded unexpected results. Lena's resilience is beyond what we anticipated. Thomas suggests increasing pressure, perhaps, orchestrating a job loss or a medical emergency. Adrian believes we've gone too far, but he enjoys his position too much to intervene. I felt cold all over. They had not finished. They intended to shatter me even more. However, they had misjudged me, as they no longer held the reins of power. Now that my hands were stable, I closed the journal. Did they want to take a test? All right. I was going to reveal my transformation to them. My heart was beating so loudly that it overpowered all other sounds as I sat in that immaculate guest room, the leather-bound diary quivering in my hands. They still intended to shatter me. A loss of employment. An urgent medical situation. More pain. I ought to have felt deceived. But I only experienced clarity. They believed they were shaping me. Instead, they had produced their greatest nightmare. Step 6. Set the illusion on fire. I took images of every page of the journal, not just the cover. I then dug deeper. I heard about the storage locker in the basement from Maria. Using the key she had given me, I discovered countless document boxes. And carefully labeled in one of them, Trust in Lena Carter records of every dollar stolen, every illegal transfer, and every forged document they had used to tamper with the trust fund left for Adrian and me were all included within. The reality was worse than I had thought. Greed wasn't the only factor here. It was deception. It was illegal. They were also going to have to pay for it. Step 7. Let go of the hammer over the next 3 days. I put my case together. Images of financial documents, statements of investment ownership paperwork for shell companies, Maria's evidence. The ultimate smoking gun, Mom's notebook, and I sent 4 emails when I was ready. One to the family attorney, the one Mom had mentioned in her journal, to the administrators of the trust, to the financial authorities, and a shout-out to an investigative reporter. I then took a seat back and bided their time till the storm struck. Step 8. Observe their burning. A few days later, the plane carrying my parents touched down. Their whole universe was already collapsing by that point. Their statements? Frozen. Their resources? Being looked into. Their riches? Exposed. When the announcement was made, I was seated in Benny's diner. Break news. A well-known business couple is being probed for trust fund fraud. As their mugshots flickered over the screen, I sipped my coffee. It buzzed on my phone. Mom, Dad, Adrian. All of them went to voicemail. Adrian then sent me one last text. What have you done? I grinned. I passed the test. Step 9. Make the last hit James Harrison, the family attorney my grandmother had hired prior to her passing, and I met with him a week later. He passed a large file across the desk after giving me an unreadable look over his glasses. Your parents violated every condition of the trust, he stated. Everything they took will be returned. Your portion will be fully restored. I leafed over the paperwork. $75 million. Divide equally between me and Adrian. I had been stolen from by my parents. However, in the end, all they had done was steal time. Step 10. Take the winner with you. My parents suffered greatly. Deception, stealing, financial offenses with actual punishments. Adrian? He was also at fault. He had been aware for years. He had profited from the pilfered funds, and it didn't sit well with the court. Ultimately, he struck a compromise, reduced jail time in return for our parents' cooperation. Coward. It didn't matter, though, since everything they owned had been lost. The opulent penthouse? Lost. The race cars? Put up for auction. The accounts that are located abroad? Emptied. And me? They never allowed me to do it, but I did it at last. I went on vacation to the Maldives, and I had a sensation I had never experienced before as I stood on that pristine sand beach and watched the sunset. Calm. Because revealing the truth isn't always the greatest form of retaliation. Despite this, it is flourishing. The sky was tinted in deep purples and gentle golds as the sun sank low over the Maldives. Warm and boundless, the ocean lapped at my feet. I was not counting pennies for the first time in my life. I wasn't worn out. The next shift, the next payment, or the next month of barely making ends meet weren't on my mind. I had freedom. I inhaled deeply and closed my eyes. Now, this was mine. The repercussions, the consequences of my parents' deception were swift and severe. Their whole empire of lies fell apart in a matter of weeks. Their property was taken. They have frozen their bank accounts. Their foreign assets were seized. The accusations of tax evasion, embezzlement, and fraud followed. From the trust intended for their children, they had embezzled millions. And now, it was costing them. Each parent received 10 years. Adrian accepted a plea bargain, serving 2 years in exchange for testifying against them, and remained spineless until the very end. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't have to. Seeing them in prison was never their punishment. The realization that they had lost everything was the reason. Adrian texted me a month after the sentencing. Lena, we need to talk. I didn't answer. He didn't give up, though. He arrived at my door a few days later. Adrian was the same as always, but this time there was no smile, no fancy clothing, and no Rolex. Only him. Empty. He said, "You won, okay?" As soon as I opened the door, "You destroyed everything." I crossed my arms and leaned on the frame. I waited. "What do you want, Adrian?" Rubbing his hands over his face, he let out a sigh. "I don't know. I guess I wanted to know if there's any way to fix this." I gazed at him. "Make this right? What should be fixed? The years of pain? The evenings he partied and I sobbed myself to sleep? The times I pleaded with my parents for assistance as they lavished my money on opulent trips? Nothing needed to be fixed." Saying in a low voice, "You stood by and watched them do this to me, Lena. I didn't know it was this bad." "You did," I interrupted. "And you liked it." His expression dropped. Since we were both aware of the reality, he had the opportunity to warn me at any moment. He might have defended me at any moment. He had the option to act morally. However, he didn't. And he wants to be forgiven now? "I'm done with you, Adrian," I declared. In his face, I closed the door. In an instant, I was also free of him. Rebuilding according to my terms now, I had $37.5 million. However, I wasn't a moron. I was not going to change who I was for money. I didn't immediately leave Benny's diner. I continued to work because I wanted to, not because I had to. I was saved by the employment. The folks over there, my true family was them. When I did leave, it wasn't to dash to a fancy apartment. The goal was to create something tangible. In order to assist children from low income households in affording college, I established a foundation, not only tuition, but also resources for housing, food, and mental health. Everything I didn't have. My parents denied me everything. What about the irony? Now they were paying for it. Poetic fairness. The final letter. I occasionally receive letters from my parents. My birthday was the date of the last one. Mom's handwritten note. We only wanted to make you stronger. When I read it, I chuckled. Because they had, in a sense. Not in the manner they had in mind, though. I wasn't made strong by them. They survived. Their legacy's demise. My beginning. I never paid them a visit in prison. Adrian and I didn't communicate again. And I didn't turn around. Due to the failure of their experiment, I wasn't the hopeless, broken girl they had anticipated. I was something else. Additionally, I created a legacy of my own that was unrelated to theirs. Perhaps they will look for me when their sentences are up in a few years. However, by then, I'll be too far in front, and they will just exist as a faint recollection. Because revealing the truth isn't always the greatest form of retaliation. Despite this, it is flourishing.